Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Age of AI, our series exploring the rapid evolution of the AI landscape, exploring what's now, what's next, and how that impacts the world of business, the workplace, individuals, and the world. I'm your host, Shelly Kramer, Principal Analyst here at Kramer&Co., and today we are diving into the Cisco AI Readiness Index 2025. This is the third year for the study designed to track how organizations are actually doing with AI deployments. Here's the headline that I think should get everyone's attention. Only 13% of companies are truly ready to capture the full potential of AI. That number has held fairly steady for about 3 years now, which tells us something critical about the discipline required to succeed with AI at scale. Meanwhile, about 83% of companies are racing to deploy AI agents, expecting workloads to surge by 30 to 50%. But the infrastructure gap between the prepared, those who are referred to in the study as the Pacesetters, and the unprepared is turning into what we're calling AI infrastructure debt. So today, for this conversation, I'm joined by DJ Sampath, who's Cisco's SVP of AI, to break down what separates these Pacesetters from everyone else and to explore whether AI is really delivering ROI, and most importantly, what your organization needs to do now to avoid falling behind in the future. Let's get to it. DJ, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Shelly.
So glad to have you. So, DJ, this is the third year of the Cisco AI Readiness Index. Surveyed over 8,000 senior business leaders across 30 global markets, 26 industries, companies with 500 plus employees. Another year, another AI readiness survey. What's the headline finding from this 2025 index?
No, I think it's a great question. And when you look at that survey, only 13% of the organizations are pace setters, what we like to call, the group of folks that are setting the pace, that are moving forward, adopting all of these the capabilities that we expect them to adopt, and they're performing and they're outperforming their peers in every possible segment. And I think the core thing to take away from this is that's not a lot. It's just 13%. So we've got, there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. 13%, not a lot. So a key stat from your readiness index about these pace setters caught my eye. Pace setters are 1.5 times more likely to report major gains in profitability, productivity, and innovation, with over 90% seeing these benefits versus 60% overall. You live immersed in this all day, every day, DJ. What makes these pace setters different? What are they doing that others aren't?
See, fundamentally, one of the core things that's different about these pace setters is that they actually take AI very seriously, right? They embed AI into the core of how they're operating on a day-to-day basis. And it's not necessarily a side project. One of the common themes that you'll observe with a lot of the enterprises that we're having these conversations with is that sometimes they're waiting for AI to sort of settle down, calm down, the waters to calm down. And the funny thing is, it's not happening anytime soon, because every single week there's something new that happens. And so if they sit on the sidelines, they're going to likely to see the whole trend pass them by. So when you take a look at these pace setters, some of the things that they're doing that's really, really interesting is that they're investing early and they're starting to plan ahead. They think about this more holistically, where they say, hey, what is our strategy going to look like? What is governance going to look like? And then they start to plan for the infrastructure side of the house. They start to re-platform their data. They're making sure that they have access to data in the right possible way. And most importantly, they start optimizing for talent and culture. They're hiring people that know how to bring this together, and they are creating this culture of innovation where they say, we have to move with a sense of urgency. When you get a lot of these things right, that's when you start to see magic happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. I have had many, many conversations with enterprise leaders charged with sort of leading the AI initiatives throughout their organizations. And, one of the things that you touched on, and being strategic about these, all of the people that I've talked with who are having great success with their AI initiatives are people who are approaching it very strategically. Some of them are creating internal councils to help advise. Some of it is, all about bringing in people with the talent needed. But some of it is also really working to create this culture of curiosity, of a desire to dive in and really get to working with this technology. And some of the people that I've talked with who are having the greatest successes are those who say, let's make it accessible across the board. Let's let people get in there and use this and play with it, as opposed to putting these guardrails on and saying, well, only these people in this department are allowed to do this, and I realize that that's a kind of a big leap of faith that you have to take, but that's also part of, to my way of thinking, really part of creating this culture of embracing innovation and change and continuous learning, and really feeding sort of the curiosity of our teams.
Absolutely, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think a core part of this is making sure that everybody feels enabled. Everybody understands the security and privacy considerations. And it's historically, security has been something that held people back. I think you're going to see with AI, it's the other way around. I think you're going to see security become an enabler, allowing people to accelerate the adoption of AI. And that's something that we're seeing as well, as you start to think about, the awareness of threats and the awareness of how these enterprises are starting to think about it. It's fundamentally shifting, and we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to get to the security question, which is one of my favorite topics. But right now, let's turn to a particularly thorny question, DJ, and that's the whole ROI business. So we know that the pressure to demonstrate ROI has understandably intensified. We've got lots of budget dollars going to fund AI initiative, lots of talk about this, lots of hope, I think. But the index shows that 80% of your survey respondents reported the urgency has risen sharply in the past 6 months or so in terms of being able to point to definitive ROI. What does the data from the index show? Is AI actually delivering AI from, for organizations? And if not, what's getting in the way?
I think the core way to sort of understand this part is that you really need to make sure that you're able to sort of measure the progress that you're making, because if you can't really measure, you can't really quite manage how or what you're getting out of the investments that you're putting in. And I think the real important thing to take away from this is you start to like double click a little bit, is that the Pacesetters are almost like are completely a pack that is moving so far along that they're leaving everybody else behind, because when you think about what they're doing right, they have the right kind of measurement already in place. They're extremely confident of understanding how they can leverage AI to be able to drive revenues. We're seeing a good chunk of them that are starting to say, hey, we already expect the AI ROI to show up within the next year. That's about 1/3 of the entire people that that did the survey,
Right.
And especially that number, when you start looking at it from a Pacesetter perspective, that number jumps from 30 to 48%. What that means is the Pacesetters have a really good grasp of the use cases that they need to start to think through that is going to that are monetizable, right? That they can turn into revenues. And I think that's really the core part of it. Everybody's expecting that to happen. There's increased amount of pressure, but figuring that part of it out and measuring it the right way is going to make all of the difference.
Yeah. This conversation reminds me of the early days of social, and the way that social sort of became a thing throughout certainly the enterprise landscape was that, first of all, brands were scared of using social and having a presence, and oh my gosh, people could be talking about us and what are we going to do and everything else. And then, we began to embrace social media channels and engaging with customers and prospects and industry leaders and all of that sort of way through social channels. But we weren't really measuring, we didn't really know how to measure the impact of social media and that sort of thing. And so we had to develop systems, we had to develop ways that could help us show what it was we were doing was making a difference. And I think that's really what we're talking about here. If you're not measuring this, there's no way you can point to, what kind of success you're having. And I will share that I was at a really small event put on by a VC firm in the Bay Area a few months ago, and they had invited not everyone was a CFO, but they had a panel of about 3 senior executives overseeing AI in their companies. And one of them was the CFO for a very, very large company, one that we are all familiar with. And I never throw them under the bus by saying the name of the company. But he was just absolutely convinced, and he was very vocal about the fact that in his opinion it was impossible to measure AI, and that is just there's no way, no how, it's impossible to do it, we're not there yet. And I remembered sitting there listening to him, and he was so confident in his opinion, and it's like, you really don't get it. Because personally, I mean, if I'm leading an organization and I come to my boss and I say, well, I'm really loving this AI business, but there's absolutely no way to measure the impact it's having, I'm not really sure I'm going to keep getting funded.
No, I think you're spot on, right? I think here's the thing. There are challenges. There's going to be, subjectivity to a lot of these things. When you think about even social media, there's always this, hey, some degree of subjectivity when you think about how you start, measuring the impact, the reach, until the right type of instrumentation started showing up, and then once you instrumented it the way you wanted to be able to sort of consume that, you started optimizing for some of these things. And sometimes, the optimization may not always be the right ones. It's not always about, putting something that's clickbait friendly that forces you to click, because, if you're optimizing for reach, you have a natural tendency towards being able to optimize for some of those things. So it's really important to find that right measurement, because not every measurement is sort of equal. There are some measurements that are going to give you some more value, that helps you extract some of the right things. So I'll give you a quick example of one of the common things is as enterprises adopt AI. The very first thing when AI started writing code was to be able to measure the number of lines that AI was writing code for. So, organizations would go around talking about my enterprise has 80% of the code being written by AI. While that measure might seem like an interesting measure, there's a deeper level of instrumentation to be able to see how much time are you saving, how many features are you shipping, how quickly are you improving your customer satisfaction scores that are more valuable to being able to measure the AI ROI. So it's really important to get to the nitty-gritties of, like, are you thinking about the right kinds of metrics, and are you instrumenting that appropriately? So I think you're spot on. It's almost like clicking into that next level of what matters most.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sometimes, to your point, we can't lose sight of what value is, and it's not just the bottom line. And, these AI use cases span customer experience, cybersecurity, operational efficiency, product innovation across all industries. And it's one of the best statements I've heard on this topic actually came from a WebEx product manager. And I was at an analyst event, and he was saying, in my opinion, we get so hung up when we talk about AI. We get so hung up in talking about increase productivity, increase efficiency, and that's what we beat our chest about. But he said, I feel like we are overlooking the most important thing. And what we're doing with all of these AI initiatives is that we're creating better experiences. We're creating better experiences for our employees.
Yeah.
We're creating better experiences for customers. And that in and of itself is actually probably more valuable, and the other things do play a role in there, but it's that experience part that's so incredibly important that we tend to just sometimes brush past in our speed to look at productivity increments and that sort of thing.
And I think that's sort of the, I think it's such a good point, and I think I couldn't agree more. The key thing is, we're fundamentally changing behavioral patterns with what you're seeing with AI. And I think that's what you're seeing with those experiences, right?
Yeah.
You're starting to see people use AI to be able to get smarter about a topic. We used to use Google searches to be able to, go do our research work. Hey, let me go understand what's happening. And prior to that, we would actually go to very specific sites, scholar.google.com, read papers and publications.
Sure.
And when I reflect back on my PhD days, a lot of grad school work required going to the library, sitting down, reading published material, and writing down and summarizing it on a piece of paper, because you don't have access to some of these materials at all possible times. We've seen that step function evolution happen systematically, where you're able to fundamentally change the quality of life of what, how with the speed with which you can learn something, summarize something, and use that knowledge to be able to act on the things that you want to act on. That entire experience curve has fundamentally shifted. It only improves. Productivity is almost a byproduct at that point in time. It's just that you're getting to the tasks
Yeah.
fundamentally, smarter, quicker, in a better fashion. So I think those are extremely valuable in the
Yeah.
broad scheme of things.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. So let's talk AI agents. Obviously, they are a very hot topic right now. Companies are racing toward an agentic future. Your studies show that about 83% of organizations report they plan to develop and deploy autonomous agents, but the index really showed that there's some problems there, that really only 1 in 3 companies feel their infrastructure is ready for this agentic future. Talk with me a little bit about what you see on that front.
Yeah, this is this shift from chatbots to agents is upon us, right?
Yeah.
It's nothing's more obvious. Like if you think about, there are coding agents right now that can go out and execute on a specific task for like 30 hours without any kind of interruption from humans. Now,
Right.
when you sort of think about this for a second, it's a huge, it has a huge set of consequences, right? Um, every single enterprise has to start to reimagine the core architecture of how they had gone out and built something, because you're not going to have just 8 billion humans. You're going to actually have like a throughput capacity of 80 billion of them, or even
Yeah.
more, because every single person is going to have 10 agents that are doing a whole bunch of tasks for them, right? So when you start to break this down, it basically falls into 3 core categories of challenges that every single enterprise is going to start to see, right? There's going to be, the first one is an infrastructure constraint. Now, when you think about chatbots, you're constantly going back and forth and interacting, and a human, like I ask a question, ChatGPT comes back with a response, and you go back and forth, and it's very spiky in nature in terms of that communication pattern. But when you start to think about agents that are running, long running agents, I kicked off 4 agents in the morning to be able to like work on a bunch of different tasks that I had gone out and set up. I'm working on this project with my son for a school portal where they can go buy some things that they, if they wanted to, for the student council. It's a fundraiser. I kicked off at three or four pull requests, and it's constantly going to, the entire coding agent is going to constantly keep interacting with my servers that are running inside of my home. What this means is the fundamental requirements that you have from the network are going to shift. The fundamental requirements of power are going to shift. And so, and last but not the least, and most importantly, the expectations that you have of compute.
Right.
So which means you're going to start to see this massive infrastructure constraint start to become a reality. The next big thing really is about data gap, right? When you start to think about all of the data that is sitting inside of the enterprise environments, these things are not sitting in the same place. And a lot of the data is being generated that these models are being trained on is human generated, but we're running out of publicly available data for a lot of these cases. So the data that's inside of the enterprises or machine generated, and you need really smart, capable, tools to be able to understand these machine generated data. And that's something that's really, we're hearing this more and more from our customers. And last but not the least, it's your favorite topic, which is trust deficit. When you think about safety and security of these models, you really have to understand that these are 2 different aspects of the whole thing, right? When it's safety, it's all about the models not hallucinating, these models being aligned, having AI that sort of understands what type of instructions to follow and doesn't go rogue. And then you have the security issues where attackers recognize that you're running an AI system and start coming up with brand new attack categories like prompt injection attacks and system prompt extraction and all those things. So when you start to think about the future of agents, what we're seeing is as people start moving from those chatbots to agents, we're starting to see these pace setters that are already there, right? We're talking about almost 70+% of Pacesetters starting to, move to these agentic things, while the rest of them are trying to get there. It's about 1/3 of them that truly believe they can secure this whole agentic infrastructure environment. So there's a trust gap that needs to be a trust deficit that needs to be filled before you start to see, the 80+%, 83% of organizations' ambitions can be satisfied with, what you can go out and accomplish.
Right. Well, you set the stage perfectly, DJ, for my next conversation point, and that's really focused on security. So, you've got autonomous agents making decisions, taking actions. Obviously, this expands the attack surface. The study reported that only 31% of organizations feel fully capable of securing their agentic AI systems or from preventing unauthorized access. That does not surprise me in any way. I also noticed that only 42% of organizations demonstrate high awareness of AI ML specific threats. Obviously, as autonomous systems proliferate, there's no small amount of risk there. Talk to me about, I've always viewed Cisco as really, kind of, one of your superpowers is that security is just foundational across the organization and always has been. So, talk with me a little bit, if you would, about security as a foundational part of infrastructure as autonomous systems become to be our new reality.
100%. This is arguably the most interesting intersection of what Cisco can accomplish, right?
Yeah.
When you think about our ability to take security and fuse it into the fabric of the infrastructure, that's very unique to us. We're the only ones that have the ability to do that, because guess what? We're a networking company and we're a security company. That puts us in a very, very unique position. And so when you think about these agents are essentially powered by a model, right? So it becomes really important to understand, what are the challenges in the model that you're using, and being able to algorithmically red team these things to understand what vulnerabilities exist. But what then becomes even more important is, as you start to deploy these guardrails for these agents, these guardrails have to be everywhere, right? It's not at a single place, because your agents are running on your laptop, they're running on your server, they're running on your router, they're going to be running everywhere.
Yeah.
Which means you really need the right kind of tools to be able to do those enforcement of those guardrails pretty much everywhere.
Right.
And that puts Cisco in pole position, right? We're able to do this really well. And when we talk to our customers, we recognize, hey, listen, the Pacesetters that are thinking about this are trying to rapidly learn how to understand these threats a lot better, right? There are these frameworks from NIST and MITRE and
Right.
OWASP. They're putting out all of these standards. And by the way, we have a seat at the table at Cisco. We sit down and we help them shape this, because we get a ton of this data from our threat researchers. We have over 500 plus threat researchers. In fact, we published a paper earlier or late last week. This is all about how, when you start to test these open source models, and a lot of these models show vulnerabilities, but they're not very interesting when you just do a one shot, a single turn conversation. But when you switch to a multi-turn conversation, you realize that these open source models, some of these are prone to very many different types of attacks. Some models have over 80% of attack success rate, which means when you attack that model, they actually are jailbroken 80% of the time. So the the reality of security is, you have to understand that it's never going to be perfect. You always have to have a zero trust mindset, and you have to make sure that you make yourself aware of this. Going back to what we talked about, the Pacesetters are thinking about this. They're investing ahead. They're making sure that they have understood what these AI specific threats are going to be. Almost 87% of the Pacesetters get it, right?
Yeah.
And that's what allows them to move forward a whole lot faster.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that really fascinates me, we've been talking about this from on the digital transformation front for a very long time, but technology alone is never the answer to anything. Success is really all about people, processes, and technology, and how they all work together. And one of the things I noted that the index this year showed is a gap as it relates to change management, which is really at the heart of integrating AI into business operations and spurring interest and fueling adoption. The report showed that 69% of the survey respondents ranked AI as a top IT budget priority. No surprises there. 58% have well-defined strategies. 81% have clear AI ownership, but only 33% have formal change management plans developed to guide employees through AI adoption. Well, why is change management such a critical part of the equation for AI success?
Yeah, Shelly, we've been through these waves of technology shifts before. I know you
Right.
mentioned social media, but I'll take you a little bit even further back out to cloud. When cloud was a thing, like,
Yeah.
there was a lot of resistance to like something new because, as humans, we have this tendency to feel comfortable with the things that we know and we operate on a day-to-day basis. There's a sense of familiarity with like things, the way they are. So
Yeah.
it becomes really hard for us to be able to like, cognitive load of like learning something new is much higher. And
We
so it
don't
takes
like
a little bit
humans aren't inherently wired for change.
for change, exactly,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
So when you think about that, it was a journey that took folks to recognize that cloud is easier, more efficient, and here's how we're going to do some of these things. And some of that pendulum might be swinging its way back at this point in time with AI, but the reality is that AI requires change management. It requires people to understand that, hey, here's how your day-to-day functions are going to change. If you're a
Yeah.
marketing professional, you know that your copy is going to, your ability to edit your copy and refine it and sort of brainstorm with an AI is going to make your work go a whole lot faster.
Sure.
If you are if you're in communications, if you are in technology, if you're writing code, AI is going to help you write better code, detect vulnerabilities faster. If you are in security, it's going to summarize a lot of your alerts a whole lot quicker than you could. So this requires change management to have a very strategic view of like educating every single team member, saying, hey, here's how you start to integrate AI into your workflows. Here's how we're going to unlock and enable this. Because at the end of the day, if you think about this, if you want to truly unlock value, you really need to make sure that you're bringing your entire team along and setting
Yeah.
the right type of culture for it. And that's why the change management is very crucial to getting this right. And you'll see that again. I
Yeah.
believe 91% of our Pacesetters are actually, have disclosed that they have a very solid change management program in place. And that's really what's unlocking success for them.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, DJ, let's wrap this up with a final message to business leaders thinking about their AI strategy. What's your best advice?
Well, my biggest one is this. Start getting off of the fence. And like, a lot of people are, like I said, are waiting for things to settle down. Don't wait for it. I think if
Yeah.
you are waiting for it, you're waiting too long, you're going to get left behind.
Yeah.
Start planning, start investing, and start jumping into the mix. Start to pick a collective set of vendors that you know and trust are going to get you to where you need to get to, and start collaborating and partnering with them to be able to hit the goals that you're setting for yourself. And most importantly, measure it, because that's how you know that you're making progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Age of AI podcast. I'm your host, Shelly Kramer, Principal Analyst at Kramer & Company. Thanks to DJ Sampath, SVP AI Cisco, for joining me today and walking us through the third annual Cisco AI Readiness Index. There's a lot to learn from the real experiences that people are having as they work to embrace and integrate AI into business operations. If you'd like to read the full Cisco AI Readiness Index, I will include a link to it in the show notes. But that's a wrap for this episode. DJ, thanks so much for joining me today.
Shelly, thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely.